Thank you, everyone. Welcome back. So last few weeks, we've been talking about jhana, right? These meditative states. And this is part of a bigger conversation. Like everything we're talking about is psychology, according to the Buddha. Psychology, we're just trying to understand our mind and how it works. And my background is psychology, and I got into psychology hoping to learn about this, learn about how we could use our minds to the highest capacity, but I learned that that's not really what you learn with a psychology degree. You're learning how to, just learning about mostly abnormal diseases, psychological diseases. It's just really just trying to get everybody to be just quote unquote normal. But we're not trying to be normal with the Buddhist psychology. We're trying to be super normal. So today we're shifting from the jhana to prajna. Prajna is another Sanskrit word, and it's sometimes translated as wisdom or intelligence or superior seeing. But again, the words don't really do it justice. And this is probably the most important word in all the Buddhist teaching. There's like entire huge 1,000-page books just on developing prajna. So this is really what it's all about. So if you thought the jhanas were cool, this is like a whole nother really cool part. And they actually work together. And remember, everything here, this is what's so important to remember. Everything here is not something you need to go get. These mental functions, like prajna, are already come with your mind, prepackaged. It's the software. You already have this software. You don't need to update. So, and again, so the jhana is a great support for the prajna. The prajna is a great support for the jhanas. So what prajna does is it teaches us to know if something is true or not, know if something is working or not. And it's not the kind of thing we think of learning as I'm going to go acquire some knowledge, where prajna is in a negative sense. We're going to look for something, and when we don't find it, now we know that this can't be true. So it's deductive. It's called deductive reasoning. Sherlock Holmes is famous for deductive reasoning. Like you eliminate all the things that aren't true and you're left with the truth. That's prajna. So what is it that's not true? Well, we have so many beliefs inside of us, right? We have so many beliefs and we don't even know we have them because up until 7 years old, we don't even think they're beliefs. We think they're reality. We hear things, we learn things, and they become just part of who we are. We get our religion from our parents, right? Usually. So, so the main purpose of prajna is to eliminate doubt, But there's actually kind of two types of doubt. Most Buddhist things, there's like two sides to things, right? Like we talked about, the jhanas are incredibly pleasurable. So most of the time when I listen to people talk about Buddhism, Buddhist teachings, they're like, oh, he just tells you to be, don't get attached to pleasure. No, the Buddha is saying, just don't get attached to the lower pleasure. Get attached to the pleasure of jhana. That's a healthy pleasure, the pleasure of going into yourself and relaxing. So likewise, there's a healthy type of doubt. Prajna is like a healthy type of doubt. It's learning to question everything. But the unhealthy type of doubt is walking around all day long, not knowing why we're doing anything. And that's how a lot of people walk around. If you don't cultivate prajna, you don't know why you're doing things. You're doing it mostly because everybody else is doing it. You know, I got this from my parents, who got it from their parents. I learned it in school. But if you don't really know something, which I'm going to kind of get into, Prajna helps you know something, then there's always some doubt in the back of your head because you're just doing it because, you know, you've been told. So again, Prajna is like an inner eye. It's looking for things. But it's in the act of not finding something that we develop Prajna. We're eliminating all the impossibilities. For example, like you have a wife or a roommate, you're wondering if they're home. You come home, you don't see their car, you go inside, you don't see anyone home. So you don't see them, they're not home. And when you don't see them, you know they're not home. I'm sorry, by not seeing them, you know they're not home. So it's by not seeing something, by not finding something, you acquire an understanding. So that's like a simple explanation of how it works. And now you could learn to apply this to everything we believe. Now, we talked about belief a couple of weeks ago, or conviction, right? So we kind of start off, like I said, up until 7 years old and going through this culture, we have these really hard set beliefs that are just like deep inside of us. And it's really hard to remove them. And if someone challenges one of these beliefs, we take it very personal, right? And it's very hard to change. You know, we all have this experience. We see people doing something harmful, and it's really hard for them to change. But with Prajna, you're able to do that. So, okay, so before I go deeper into Prajna, I'll connect it to the jhana. So jhana is like pointing a gun. Okay, like think about a sniper. The sniper has to be very still, has to slow down its breathing. And Prajna is like pulling the trigger and noticing if you hit the target or not. Okay, so we mentioned that there's like, in a snap of a finger, there's like 60 or 360 moments of mind happening. So it's happening so fast. Like when we're watching a movie, it seems like a solid movie, even though it's made up of frames. So with the jhana, we almost get to like slow down time. Everyone familiar, like when something dangerous happens, like almost to get into a car accident, you'll notice like time will slow down and you get super calm. It's almost like getting into like a jhana and you just kind of know what to do. And why is that happening? Because you're no longer, your mind is not jumping. The monkey mind is not jumping around to external objects, and there's no mental chatter. So the mind really gets, you know, focused on what it's looking at. So when we practice the jhana, for example, we calm the mind down. And remember, when the mind gets cut from the external, we get this feeling of joy, pleasure, and our analysis gets really sharp, right? So imagine now you wanna like look at something inside of you. Look at your own mind. You can slow it down, and then with the prajna, you can look and examine and see if something's true or not. So I'll give you an example. Imagine like your mind is like a big field with all different plants, all types of plants of all sorts growing. So when you slow down your mind and you practice jhana, you'll notice that you can see this field. You can see the landscape of all of your thoughts. You start to see your thoughts, right? Most of the time, we don't see our thoughts. We're just running, driving, and the thoughts are just with us. Sometimes they're annoying us, like reminding us to do things, yelling at us, all types of things. So when you start to relax and go into jhana and you're not so focused on external things, now you notice the thoughts. So the thoughts are like the plants growing in this field. You're starting to see all these thoughts that you're having. But then if you go even deeper, you notice that the thoughts have roots. The plants have roots. So the roots are like our beliefs. So our thoughts grow out of our deep beliefs. So as you're starting to look, you're hearing your thoughts. Then you're noticing your beliefs. So when you're in that state, again, Buddha is all about question everything. There's nothing exempt from this. Like you're supposed to question every single thing, especially him. You know, he famously said, question everything. So we're going to go through our beliefs. So now we're looking at the roots and we ask ourselves. So now this is where the analysis comes in. We ask ourselves, where did I get this belief from? Right? Like we start to notice these beliefs we have. Most of the time, we don't even think we have beliefs. Everybody thinks they're being perfectly rational, but we're operating by these beliefs. And personal story, I lived in Japan for 2 years, and I learned the language, I got involved in the culture, I worked for a company, and I really just wanted to understand Japanese culture. And at first I'm like, oh my God, they do so many things better than us. They're so much smarter. Like we have all these weird cultural things that we do in America that are wasteful, that are unproductive, that are hurtful. So I'm like, wow, they do it better. Then after living there for over like a year, I started to notice they do so many weird things that are unproductive. I'm like, why do they do this? And then I come back to America and I realized like, oh, wow, we do a lot of weird things too. And then it became kind of like my obsession to travel and see all the weird things. And that's why I love meeting people, because everybody, when you listen to them, they'll tell you the funny things they believe. And you're like, really, you believe it? And you've made it this long believing that? That's incredible. So we all have like these funny beliefs because we all have different backgrounds. And if we don't examine them, I think it was like, Plato said, like, the unexamined life is not worth living, so we become a philosopher when we start to, look at why do we do what we do? And we do what we do because of our thoughts. And then where do our thoughts come from? Our thoughts come from our beliefs. Where do our beliefs come from? They come from like our parents. They come from like, they don't come from the Buddha. They don't come from like the smartest people in the world. They come from some religious book. Again, like if Christianity was just one thing, there would be just Christianity, but there's like thousands of Christian churches and they're all different and they all, and they all like, so we like kind of, so we can ask ourselves, where did this belief come from? Who told me? Was it my parent? Did I get this from school? Did I get this from social media? And then you ask yourself, have I ever actually looked into this? Have I ever actually questioned this thought? And then go further. Is this belief actually causing me harm? So you see, this is just the process of starting to develop prajna. And it also, as you could see, it simultaneously is developing jhana. You have to slow down in order to get your mind to be analyzing this way. But when you start analyzing this way, it puts you into a zone. It actually can get you into the jhana. So it's really kind of cool. So again, yeah, think of how much we see it on TV. Politicians said it and then they lie. So it's like, and now we're just in this situation in a world with so little prajna in this world right now, so little jhana. So people are just reading a headline and then calling up, texting their friend. Did you see what Trump did? Did you see this? Did you see what Fauci said? It's like, it's just, so this is the opposite of prajna. Prajna is like, whoa, who said it? What's the evidence? What's the source of this? But if you never slow down, which we don't do much in our culture, it's really hard to even develop any prajna. Right, like we believe like we worship the right God, or we have a special bloodline, right? And it feels good to hear that. We develop a whole identity over our special belief. And it's very comforting. This is why people don't want to develop prajna. Oh, you're guaranteed to go to heaven because of this reason. Okay, good. End of story. I don't have to take care of my health. I don't really have to be that nice. It's just do this, do the best I can, and when I die, I automatically go to heaven. So that's not the Buddhist path, is to just hear something and believe it. That's called blind faith, right? So when we think of attention is just being aware of something. But prajna is a very special type of attention. It's like that aha moment, an epiphany. We're looking really carefully, because sometimes the Buddha gives us instructions to go on a long chain of logic. You're looking for the self. Could the self be here? Could the self be here? Where's the self hiding? We're looking in the body. We're looking all over for the self. So we're on this mission to find the self. And finally, we keep looking and we don't find it. And then we have this moment of like, wow, the self I thought was there is not there. And that moment is prajna. That's how we develop prajna. So the deeper the thing you're looking for, the deeper the aha moment you have. And so that's a truly, like, prajna is truly liberating in the Buddhist sense of the word. It will free you. We talk about free will, right? So the jhanas give you a very long, pleasurable, peaceful state, which is, again, very useful, but it's not a permanent solution. Like, some people sit down to meditate and they just want to, clear their mind. Some people, a little bit more advanced, they sit down to meditate. They're like, okay, I'm trying to get to the jhana. They get to the jhana, they feel it, they feel great, and they feel wonderful. Going one step further is to go to prajna. Prajna will give you the permanent peace. In fact, the word Buddha, see, before the Buddha became the Buddha, there was previous Buddhas from like thousands and thousands of years before. So it was almost like a rumor. People would say, oh, this guy's a Buddha. Buddha means awakened, but it means awakened in the prajna sense. It means, they even say that prajna is a woman. They describe it like a woman, and she is the mother of all Buddhas. So prajna is when you develop prajna, you become a Buddha. Why? Because to become a Buddha, you have to see reality as it truly is, without any of the prejudice, you could say. And when you see that, that's called becoming awakened. So the word Buddha existed before the Buddha, but it was more like a rumor, and people would claim to be, this person's a Buddha, this person's a Buddha. So when the Buddha came around, he said, I'm actually a Buddha, and it was the prajna that made him the Buddha. He didn't discover anything. He discovered what wasn't true. He discovered certain things that everybody takes for granted, and he says, this isn't there. So that's why prajna gives you that permanent liberation, that permanent peace. However, so when you think about a child, right? A child doesn't have prejudice. A child doesn't have these beliefs. So in a sense, a child is kind of closer to a Buddha, you could say, right? Or has, and it does, it's able to see things without our rigid beliefs. And as we get older and we get more beliefs, we get more rigid, we get more unhappy. But when you develop prajna, you're not gullible like a child. You're not just believing everything. You have like the best of both worlds. You have that childlike wonder where you're not walking around with beliefs. Every moment is miraculous. Every moment is an opportunity to see more truth. But at the same time, because you have developed prajna, you're not gullible. You're able to prajna really lets you see hypocrisy, lies, false ideas and beliefs. And here's something interesting. I just learned this. There's a podcast I listen to. It's a husband and wife. He's like a neurologist, and she's some other PhD. And they're both very into health, and they're plant-based. And they were talking about different mental functions will send blood to different areas of your brain. And your brain has more blood than any other part of the body, more than the heart. The brain has all this blood. And where there's blood, the nerves can grow. So this Prajna work, this work on jhana and Prajna, all of these mental factors actually are rewiring your brain in real time. You're changing your brain without doing any brain surgery. And if you think about it, like, your brain is not your mind. The Buddha is very clear. You can't prove, because mind is an experience, brain is matter. However, there is an interaction. So you could think of the brain and all, like, one neuron can have 30,000 different connections to other neurons. So it's in the billions and billions and billions of connections. When you what was I going to say? The connections are like highways. So when we start to use Prajna, we start to change the highway structure in our brain. And what's that going to do? It's going to change our thoughts. It's going to change the way our mind operates. Again, the mind is not come from the brain, but when we change the pathways, the mind, we change our mental habits. And that's done through Prajna. That's done through Prajna. So I'll talk more about that in a little bit, actually. So now I want to talk about a mental factor called faith. So Prajna requires many mental factors to develop it, right? This is the most important work we can do, the Buddha said. So we need to really support it with other mental factors. And one of the most important mental factors is faith or trust. Now, again, don't get caught up in the word, because I'm going to explain what this means. Now, you might think that faith sounds the opposite of Prajna, right? It's like, faith, you're telling me just to have faith, because most of us, when we think of faith, we're thinking of blind faith, right? Like, most people nowadays, when they think of religion, when they think of faith, they literally frame it as almost the opposite of Prajna. So they're saying, like, you should believe in this for no rational reason. It's just I've read the Bible. It never says that you should just believe it, but that's what it's become in this modern time, right? So it's basically saying that, that's what makes you faithful, is that you don't question it, like, right? Like, there's this angry God who created you, and again, doesn't want you touching your genitals. So like, it's like, that's what most people think of faith. They tell us, and then other people who are not maybe religious, but they follow, like, oh, this politician, this scientist, the influencer. But when the Buddha talked about faith being so important, he meant faith based on reason. Faith based on reason. The Dalai Lama has a book called Faith Based on Reason. So this is faith based on evidence, seeing it for ourselves. So just think about how our culture is. We're really taught not to do this. Like, don't sign a prenup, because we should just have faith that we're gonna, but so there's just like this whole idea that, like, we're supposed to be blind. It's supposed to be like just blind. And there is a place for trust and love and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying not that, but there's this deliberate rejection of Prajna in our culture. And that's why I already mentioned Buddha is radically different, because he does not want any blind faith. If you try to do it, oh, the Buddha told me, he's like, no, don't do it because I told you. He wanted to get rid of that idea of blind faith. So again, there's like every word, you see, even this word faith, this is what's so dangerous in our culture, is we hear a word and it means two different things to two different people. The words are not clearly defined. In Sanskrit, the words were defined. You look up a word in a Sanskrit dictionary, it meant something. Everybody knew what it meant. But now words mean very different things to different people. So it's really tricky to have a conversation. But Buddha was great with words. So he flipped it. Like faith is not blind faith. Faith comes from seeing for yourself. Remember, come and see. In fact, there's even a saying, you should not trust a teacher for 10 years. You should know a teacher for 10 years before you trust them. Okay? Not just because they speak nice and they have a nice website. You should test a teacher for 10 years. It's kind of exaggerated, but there is some truth to that. You should always be testing. But it doesn't mean like people think testing means like you're supposed to argue with everything they say. That's not the same as testing. There's a fine line, which I'll get into also. So I'm going to read a few quotes from the Buddha. So here's the first one. Do not accept any of my words on faith, believing them just because I said them. Be like an analyst buying gold who cuts, burns, and critically examines his product for authenticity. Only accept what passes the test by proving useful and beneficial in your life. Okay? That last line, by proving useful and beneficial in your life. So the Buddha from the very beginning is saying, don't take anything I say. So people are like, no, Buddhism's a religion. I see people praying to the Buddha. It's like, yeah, they don't know what they're doing. Everything has gotten degenerated. You know, we're going to talk about, you can gain faith in the Buddha, but not just like, oh, my parents are Buddhists, so I have faith in Buddha. He would not like that. he would definitely advise against that. Okay, here's another quote. I cannot wash away your sins with water. The suffering cannot be removed by my hand. I cannot transfer my realization to you. I can help you by giving teachings, and you should strive to liberate yourself. Think about it. This is before the baptism. He's telling you, I can't wash away your sins with water. Every culture comes up with this idea of a baptism in water. Oh, your sins are clear. Just go in the Ganges River, right? Or I could put my hand on you and I can bless you. People think like, oh, I saw the guru, and the guru, just looking in his eyes, I became enlightened. Like you hear all these type of stories. And there is some truth if you're around a person who is very good with jhana and prajna and has a great loving kindness. Yes, when you're around them, you're going to feel good. There's definitely something energetic going on. Absolutely. But that's different from, I got blessed. I got my blessing, so I'm done. I'm going to heaven or whatever. Okay, so here's another little story. So there were people who came to the Buddha, and they were saying, well, there's this great teacher who's calling himself awakened, and he's got a huge following, and everybody's saying his people are saying that he's right and he has the highest truth. And he's saying that those people over there, that teacher over there is wrong. And then you go to the other school and they're saying that they have it all figured out and they have it wrong. So they come to the Buddha and they say, they expound and glorify their own doctrines. But as for the doctrines of others, they depreciate them, revile them, show contempt for them, and disparage them. They leave us absolutely uncertain and in doubt. Which of these venerable Brahmins and contemplatives are speaking the truth and which ones are lying? So you see, it's built into the very fabric of Buddhism is, yes, you're going to get confused. You're going to come across people who are going to be claiming to have the truth. And you're like, well, who do I choose? Who do I choose? You've got to learn to figure it out yourself. But the beautiful thing is you can. That's the beautiful thing. You can figure it out. Why? Well, because with Prajna, well, because of a lot of things, but because of jhana and developing Prajna, you could learn to see what is definitely not true. And when you start to eliminate what's not true, then you see what is true. And what Buddha says is true is like this wonderful bliss. It's like, it's like beyond even what we think of as heaven. It's wonderful. It's even bliss beyond the jhanas. We've only talked about like the first 2-3 jhanas. There's a fourth jhana, which is even more blissful. But Buddha's saying that even beyond the jhanas, there's way more blissful states if you could understand Prajna. And it's permanent. So that sounds pretty good. So then the Buddha responds to these people. He says, of course you are uncertain, Kalamas. Of course you are in doubt. When there are reasons for doubt, uncertainty is born. So in this case, Kalamas, don't go by reports. So don't go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by scripture, by logical conjecture and inference of others, by analogies, by agreement through pondering views. So you're sitting around having this great conversation and it sounds great, so I'm just going to believe it. By probability or by the thought, this contemplative is our teacher. So in other words, he's our teacher, so he's right. And that's how most people are. They're born, this is my parents' rabbi. So he says it's right, and that's how most of these religious communities are run. This person is the head, he says it's right, so we follow it. So don't follow legends. Well, we've been doing this forever. We've been doing it, our parents did it, and our great-grandparents did it, so we do it. But did you ever question it? No, we just do it because it's everybody does it, right? Scripture, it's in the Bible, so it must be true, But here's the most important part. He says, when you know for yourselves that these qualities are unskillful, these qualities are blameworthy, these qualities are criticized by the wise, these qualities, when adapted and carried out, lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. So that's kind of interesting. He's kind of saying, like, don't just follow the 10 commandments because Moses brought them down from God. He's saying, understand why it's bad to kill someone, because that person is going to suffer. And is that going to be good for you? If you kill someone's family, they're going to want to kill you and your family. It's just, you don't need God to tell you. You don't need scripture to tell you that killing is bad. But you do need to work it out. And the same thing with someone having sex with someone's wife. It's going to make them angry. So, but it doesn't mean people do it all the time. People do it all the time, even though they have the 10 commandments. They call themselves Christian, they call themselves Jew, Muslim. They break the 10 commandments. But if you have prajna, you know for certain this is never going to be a good idea. There's never a time. If you have to ask yourself, should I sleep with this person's husband or wife? You shouldn't do it. If there's no real reason to justify that, they can get a divorce. There's things you can do. So there's certain things that you should know for yourself. And if you don't know for yourself, well, what do? Find someone whose family has fallen apart because of a affair. Go to jail and look at a murderer. Look where their life wound up. So the point is that, and that's just an example. This is true for everything. And I'll just finish this up. So then Buddha says, what do you think, Kalamas? When greed, hatred, and delusion arises in a person, does it arise for welfare or for harm? And then they respond, for harm, Buddha. And then Buddha says, and this greedy person overcome by greed, his mind possessed by greed, kills living beings, takes what is not given, goes after another person's wife, tells lies, and induces others to do likewise, all of which is for long-term harm and suffering? And they say, yes, Buddha. So you understand, like, you can see for yourself from your own experience when greed has caused you problems, when you know, like, you're gambling and you're ahead and you're like, oh, I can make a little bit more, and then you lose it, you lose it, or hatred. So there's certain things that are never good, and you could figure those out really quickly. But then there's the difficult things, and that requires more prajna. But the beautiful thing about this process that Buddha teaches, start with the easy things. Develop prajna. It's really like going to the gym. Jhanas is like going to the gym. Prajna is like going to the gym. You want to develop. You need to keep developing this. It's also described as a sword. It's a sword. It cuts through illusion. It cuts through lies. So, and the more you practice, the more sharp the sword gets. So sometimes you can go on this deep investigation and you don't find anything, or maybe you don't even, maybe you don't not find, like, nothing happens. Just every time you practice analysis and prajna, you're sharpening the sword. So even if you don't find anything, even if you don't feel like the meditation was good, the fact that you're thinking critically, that you're looking to find the truth, and that's something you can also do, is just, instead of praying, oh, let me go to heaven, you can really start to change your prayers or your aspirations. Like, let me know the truth. Let me eliminate my beliefs. That seems a lot more reasonable than, let me find the right, thing to believe in. Okay, I'm going to take this from Lou. Okay. Lou, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted. And
yes.
First, before I say anything, I'm sorry I'm like going off video, but I don't know, my computer like just keeps changing the lights, and it's probably more distracting for everyone else.
No, it's all right. It's all right. We can't even
It's
see
worth
it.
it. Anyway, I do have a question about Prajna. So is Prajna, I mean, I get what you're saying, that, it to the heart of trying to understand the Buddhist practice and the view, you need to question it. Because we're stacked with a lot of preconceptions that are, some of them are social, some of them are animal. You see something, you either have to, you have to make an evaluation. Is this something that I should run away from? Is something I should just ignore or when?
Well, that's not prajna. That's kind of discernment. But yeah,
no, that's not prajna, right? This is what we're trying to see through. We're trying to see through this,
right?
These distractions. But my question is, what is prajna? Is that something I have? Is it something I see? Is it something I am? What is prajna? I mean, we're getting a lot of, I'm getting a lot of description, but I'm not getting what prajna is.
Okay.
Truly.
Okay, let me answer that. Okay, and then I'll continue, because I'm gonna answer a lot of that with what I have planned too. But yeah, thank you. Okay, so remember, prajna is a mental factor. So it's something that a mental factor arises in a moment of mind. And remember, every time I snap my finger, that was 360 moments of mind. And in those moments of mind, any one of these mental factors can arise, such as prajna. Now, what are they? That's the very, very good question in Buddhism, because that's the whole question. That's what we call ontology. So we talked about epistemology, phenomenology, psychology. Ontology is the study of what actually exists. So does prajna exist? So this requires prajna to understand. But simply put, for now, just think of prajna as a function of our mind. It's something that we can use. Like, every moment we have our mind, and we can bring mental factors in, and we can use these, I call them apps, these apps like in our phone. So Prajna is like such an app. Let me continue and see if it answers. If not, we can definitely come back to that. So, so this is going to, again, sound like a lot of different lists of information. The point is not to memorize it. For now, just let your mind be curious, let it mix with it. It's not about memorizing it. If you have one aha moment from this, that's great. Then you can go back and listen again. And if you come up with questions for me, that's great. That means you're developing Prajna. Asking questions, especially why, is how we develop Prajna. I was a really annoying child because I would ask my parents why. They'd give me an answer and I'd say, well, why? Why'd you do that? And it would drive them crazy. But that's actually a good practice for Prajna. Just don't do it to your parents. Do it to the right people. So to guide us, the Buddha explained that there's three types of objects. Okay? So just bear with this. An object is something that our mind or our senses, like our eyes, our ears, can apprehend. So we hear a sound, our ear, the object is the sound of the bird, the ear is the sense organ, and we apprehend it. So the first type of object is called an apparent object, apparent or manifest object. So these are objects that we can experience with our five senses. So you have five different senses, and that means there's five types of object. And when we call sensory perception direct, valid perception. Because when we look at something red, a red flower, we don't have to first see the red flower, then think that color is red, and then we see it red. We see it, and our mind automatically sees red. It's not technically automatically, but it's very quick. It's quick enough, right? So that's an apparent object. When you taste something, you taste it, you know the taste. So, for example, if something is red, and we all know it's red, and someone says it's blue, you know this person is not being honest. They're trying to confuse you. And think about it. People are very gullible. So people really, it's called gaslighting in our culture now. It's a popular word based on a movie where you can convince someone that something that's so obviously not true, but they'll believe it. So the first object is an apparent object. There's really not much we need to talk about that here. You don't really need Prajna for that. You see it, you taste it, you know it. The second type of object is really where the focus is. It's called hidden objects. A hidden object is something that we need to use some type of reasoning to understand, some type of logic. For example, when we're young, we see smoke and fire. We see smoke, we always see a fire, we see smoke coming out. Hundreds of times we see fires, there's always a smoke coming out, right? So then one day we're older and we see smoke coming out of a chimney, we know there's a fire. So even though we can't see the fire is hidden, we know there's a fire there from the smoke. So this is an example of Prajna or analysis. Okay, so another example of a hidden object is impermanence. So this is one of the most important concepts in Buddhism, in Buddhist teaching. So you could think of Prajna. We use Prajna to understand impermanence better and better and better. Because the more we understand something like impermanence with Prajna, the deeper the Prajna gets. But when the deeper the Prajna gets, the deeper our understanding and level of impermanence gets deeper, which allows us to get deeper Prajna. So it's like the subject, the looker, and then we understand the object better, the hidden object better. So it's this amazing process of getting more and more deep, deep, deep. Right? So you don't just work on your mind, you work on the object, then you work back on your mind, you work on the object, you work back on the mind. So real brief on impermanence, because that's a huge topic, but you look at a car, right? The car comes off the factory. It's brand new. And then the next day, it looks like exactly the same car. But technically, that car has already started to break down. The second anything comes together, it is already changing. It's always changing. Right? So we can't see, when you look at the car, you don't see impermanence. But when you start to look at everything, you realize, yeah, everything changes, right? The trees change. Even a mountain will be there for like 10,000 years, but eventually the mountain will go down to the sea. It'll be completely gone. And then another mountain will come up. So everything is always changing, but we can't see it. But when we use Prajna and we start to look, so for example, we don't just look for impermanent phenomena. We say, is there a permanent phenomena? Meaning, is there something that doesn't change? And you think, well, my mother changes, my house changes, I needed to change the roof, the weather changes, and you start to notice, I can't find anything that doesn't change. So then you're like, maybe the Buddha's right. But it doesn't mean that you're like, okay, now I believe the Buddha. You always keep it open. You're always looking for that thing that changes. You're always sharpening it, but you're never going to find something that doesn't change. That's what's so cool about this. You start to find things that are true. So the point is that for a hidden object, you need to use the mind. Remember, the apparent object, you don't need to use the conceptual mind. You taste it, the taste is right there. But when it comes to a hidden object, you need to use logic. You need to use reason. So for example, what temperature does water freeze at? 32 degrees, right? Or 0 degrees Celsius. You can't just look at water and know what temperature it freezes at, right? An animal doesn't know what temperature it freezes at because it doesn't have the ability to do logic. But it knows it doesn't want to freeze. So if an animal is in cold, it gets out of the cold. It doesn't know that its blood is going to freeze at 32 degrees. It just knows, get out of there. But we can know that it freezes, and not just because someone told us water freezes at 32 degrees, we can test it ourselves right now for like $1. You buy a thermometer and you can test it out and you could know. What happens if we don't get enough vitamin C, right? We can't just look at a food and know that it has vitamin C or what it's going to do. But we know that for people who don't take vitamin C in their diet, there has these consequences. Your body can't build collagen, so your body gets scurvy. So these are called hidden phenomena. Same thing with cooking. You put the ingredients and the recipe together, 100 out of 100 times it works if you keep the variables all the same. Okay, so now I'm just going to touch on the third type of object called a very hidden object. So we have hidden object and then very hidden object. A very hidden object is something that we can't even reach it with logic. These are like things that only a theoretical Buddha, someone like Yoda, someone who left the matrix, someone who knows the code, they know the very hidden objects. They know exactly how karma works. They can look at you, know your past karma. They have miraculous powers. They can walk on water. They know all that kind of stuff. Those are the very hidden objects. So the point is this. So the point is that we don't start, Buddhist practice doesn't start with the very hidden objects, whereas most religions nowadays start with that. Like they teach you the biggest thing, like you can't see God, but he exists and he's making sure you don't masturbate. Like that's all he cares about, you know? So they start with the big things, whereas Buddha starts with first the obvious thing, like this is the color red, right? Like what's obvious to the five senses. But then the Buddha starts talking about hidden objects, like where there's smoke, there's fire. So you start off with something that's very easy to prove. Then you gain a little bit of trust. What else did the Buddha say? Oh, impermanence. You investigate. Oh yeah, you're right. Everything is impermanent. Wow. Or, for example, hatred causes future harm to myself. You could test that out and you can see. So you start to gain trust in the Buddha, not from blind faith, but because he keeps nailing it. He tells you something, you check it out, you're like, wow, that was right. If someone keeps teaching you something, keeps giving you advice, like every time they tell you to invest in a stock, you keep making $1 million. You're like, okay, this guy's got some kind of powers. So now what else? You go into the very hidden objects. Even then, you don't just jump right in and say, okay, I trust the Buddha. He says we reincarnate, we must reincarnate. No, the Buddha explains in logic how reincarnation works, but he does it. But first, you know what I mean? You go for the low-hanging fruit. Then you advance to the more deep stuff. Okay? So I'm wrapping it up now. But just kind of to just frame this in another way of faith. So they say there's 3 types of faith. So again, I'm giving you this advice, which I find so useful. And it's all really common sense if you think about it. Nothing about this is like mystical or religious. This is really hardcore common sense. So when you see someone, if you want to get healthy and you see someone who looks really unhealthy, are you going to get inspired by them? Of course not, right? Like Eli, he looks great, got a great body. You're going to listen to him for your movement, for your posture. So first thing first is you want to see the evidence. You want to see the person living it, walking the talk, right? Now, again, people can cheat, so you don't just trust them because they look great, but that's a good starting point, right? You see someone who seems very peaceful. You're like, oh, I want to be peaceful. How do you do it? You know, be like a kid. Hey, I like what you do. What do you do? What makes you this peaceful? Or what makes you? So another example is someone playing guitar. You see someone playing guitar amazingly. You don't need to believe it. Your ears are hearing it, right? You get inspired. You want to learn guitar really bad. So the first type of faith is called vivid faith. You're really excited. You're inspired. Then you talk to the teacher and you're like, I want to learn guitar, or I want to get healthy. How do I do it? And they're like, okay, I've been doing this for 30 years. And the first 10 years, I was doing it completely wrong. So don't do what I did the first 10 years. But here's what I recommend you do. So you get inspired. You trust this person that they're passionate. And you say, I'm going to do what I'm going to take their class. I'm going to try for 2 months. You do it for 2 months, what they say. You're playing 2 songs. People are telling you, wow, you're doing really good on guitar. So now you're excited, right? Now you have more faith. The third type of faith is called convinced faith. Again, it's never 100%. You never want to be like, I 100% believe someone. Even your greatest teacher, you should still question until you're a Buddha, until you completely see it yourself. Always leave room, no blind faith, you know. But as you see a teacher is so reliable over and over and over again, that's when you can trust them. If someone is always telling you they're going to do something and they don't show up, the first time you're like, okay, things change. The second time you're like, all right, I'll give them benefit of the doubt. After 5 times, you start to say, I can't trust this person when it comes to time. But you can trust them in other areas. So it's not like, oh, I just don't trust this person. Everything is different. We trust different people for different things we want to learn. Okay? All right. So again, you don't just wake up and say, I believe in karma, or I believe in reincarnation. You start off with just learning like we've been doing. Oh, you don't believe in the jhanas. You're like, okay, well, Jason's saying that that the Buddha said there's these jhanas. Well, Jason, I've known Jason for 10 years. He's been really at these jhanas. I'm going to give it a shot. I want to try the jhanas for 2 months and see if I get any results. Other people might say, Jason's crazy, but I like what he's talking about the jhanas. Let me go do some of my own research and find a different teacher. Let me find what the Buddha said, and you do your own research. So it's not like you just dive in and believe it. Anything good, you should test it, you know. And And you'll know when you test something. Like, I'm very weary when people just jump from one diet to the next, one supplement to the next. It makes me not comfortable. I don't want them to take it because I recommended it. I want them to understand why this is going to work. At least understand. I'm not guaranteeing it's going to work, but this is at least the framework. This is the logic. Okay, so how do we develop this prajna, this wisdom? Again, 3-step process, slightly different, number of 3. First step is just learning to listen. Think of how hard this is these days, right? You have a conversation, like you guys are listening. This is great, you know? And that's why these type of sessions are important. It's important to be able to listen, to read a whole book. But nowadays, you say one thing, people are already ready to jump down your throat. Like, you say something that they don't agree with, they feel like they need to defend right away. But learn to listen to crazy ideas, right? Don't be gullible. That's the trick. You could listen to something without believing it. People don't understand that. Some people, they don't trust themselves. Like, oh, if I listen, I'm going to believe it. Like, no, listen. So the first thing is just listen to a new idea. Impermanence. I've just said, Buddha said everything is impermanent. Everything that comes together is impermanent. That's interesting. Before you start judging it, before you start ripping it apart, just take in what that means. Everything is impermanent. Not like, you know, certain things are impermanent. Because when the Buddha says everything's impermanent, all phenomena, when we talk about these mental factors like prajna, they're impermanent too. 1 minute you're in prajna, you're in the jhana, 1 minute you're not. It's impermanent because it's come together. So everything is in constant change. The second step of learning, of developing prajna, is called reflection. So now you heard about the impermanence. Oh, the car. So now you're gonna start thinking about it while you're walking, while you're driving, while you're cooking. You could be doing this, of course, while you're meditating, while you're sitting and breathing, and you're asking questions. You're really analyzing something. And the cool thing about the way the Buddha laid out books and the commentaries is they give you like a whole series. A lot of Buddhist teaching are framed like a debate, just like Socrates. Socrates always framed things like a dialogue. It was never like Socrates is just teaching. It was always like he would say something and there would be a response. And in the dialogue, you would get to it. Learn to do that in your own head. Learn to have that dialogue in your own head. Take 2 sides. The only way you're really going to know something is if you really bang the 2 sides against each other. And usually the truth is like kind of somewhere in between, right? So it's like rubbing 2 sticks together. Eventually the sticks burn up and then you get to the truth. So that's the second thing. First, you take in the new information. The second thing is you're really practicing this prajna. You're really asking the questions. You're really investigating. And remember, I started by talking about your own beliefs. Like, if you really want to do this work, it's going into your own beliefs. Question everything you think. And don't be afraid. Be happy when people notice things that you do that you don't notice what you do. You know, Freud, I'm not a big fan of, but what he did bring to the Western modern culture is the idea that most of our lives, most of what we do is governed by unseen processes that are going on, what he called the subconscious. It's what the Buddha said too. But the difference is Freud blamed everything on your parents, whereas Buddha's like, we all got it, but you can go in and you can reprogram. Okay, so that brings me to the third part. You ready? This is very exciting. So after you do the analysis, when you start to remove these beliefs, you're actually rewiring your brain. You're changing those highways in your brain. So people ask about free will, right? Do we have free will? Well, when we're out and about and we're interacting, it's really hard. We kind of fall into habits, right? We're a people pleaser. If we're a people pleaser, we wind up being people pleasing over and over again. And then we leave. We're like, why did I do that? Like, we wanted to say something. Why did I hold back? I really wish I said it. And we beat ourselves up. It's because we're doing it all backwards. It's really hard to change ourselves in the moment. All these books you read, all this self-help stuff, it doesn't work because it doesn't teach you this idea of taking time out of your day to reprogram yourself. So when you're doing this investigation actively, you're bringing about, so this is where the jhana comes in. You're going into, if you can sit and meditate or whatever makes you, it could be a walk, but it does help to sit in one place. And you start to get close to the first jhana, so you feel very peaceful inside. You're not thinking about external objects. You're not thinking about what you have to do. You're dedicating time to do what's called an analytical meditation. So most people think, again, meditation just, oh, I just need to calm down. Some people are like, oh, meditation is blissful, jhanas. But now you're like, I'm going to dedicate some of my meditation to reprogramming myself. This is the most exciting thing. Now we call it neuroplasticity. But again, our science is always looking at the effect, not the cause. Buddha's teaching us how to do neuroplasticity. They're just like, oh, it turns out if you do dancing when you're older, you're you know, like they used to tell us that you don't, your brain doesn't change after it finishes developing. Now they're like neuroplasticity, but Buddha is teaching us how to do it. And it's by bringing jhana together with prajna that we get to go radically change ourselves. So that's where the free will comes in. That's the most free will we have, is to go into jhana and to slow down things, almost to time stops. Think about, like, again, our movie is like spinning. We're seeing many frames. If you could slow down those frames, pull up that thought, just like on a monitor. You're like, I like to think of it like you're in the, like when I sit down at my computer, I'm in my workstation. You have a workstation in your mind that you access when you're in jhana. You're like Captain Kirk, right? You're in the spaceship. You're at, and you're like, oh, I got my spaceship. I got a quantum computer. I could start looking at anything. And you'd be amazed when you start doing this, you'll be able to pull up memories from your childhood and vividly look at them. The problem is we get trauma. We don't want to look at these things. And that's why we lose these abilities. But if we're willing to start questioning things, our prajna gets sharper, our jhana gets sharper. And before you know it, we're just reprogramming, we're upgrading all the time. We're doing brain surgery every day. All right. So I just explained the 3-part process. I want to just explain again, this is just for fun. It's like this is a traditional 7-stage process. This is a little bit longer explanation, but I'll do it quickly. Just an example. So you own a store and you notice that there's money missing. So you're like, so the first stage of 7 is called wrong view. You notice money's missing, but you think, oh, I must have made a mistake. You blame it on yourself, right? Step number 2 is there's money missing again. And now you're like, I wonder if one of the employees stole it. Like it's like 25% there, right? Like you're having doubt. Number 3 is called equal doubt. Now you notice more suspicious behavior. Now you're starting to think 50-50 chance they're stealing it or 50% chance they're not, nothing's being stolen. Then number 4 is like 65%. You talk to one of the other employees and they're kind of insinuating that someone's stealing. Number 5 is like 90% there. You remember this employee, you caught them lying. So you're like, everything's starting to come together now. Now you're like, they're probably stealing, which is true because they are stealing. So it's true that they're stealing, right? That's 90%. Then you overhear them talking about stealing. So you're 99% there. That's called an inferential cognition. So this is when you're doing the logic, right? You're doing the logic, and you're checking for permanent objects, and you can't find anything permanent. Or in this case, this person's stealing. But then the 7th is called direct perception. You catch them red-handed. You're 100% certain. You see them in the act. So this is how we start to question our own views. We start off with a view. We think it's one way, and then we start to question it, and then we shift to the correct way of seeing things. All right, and I'll just close out with just a final thought, because we're going to talk more about Prajna. This is just the beginning. But the two things which Buddha made huge emphasis, probably 75% of what Buddha taught was jhana and prajna. These are two things that are almost deliberately taken out of our culture, if you think about it. Because I've been beating up on cheeseburgers and people have been offended. So let's talk about Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola has the fourth largest army in the world, okay? Coca-Cola is not just a soda company. It is a powerful, powerful entity, whatever you want to call it. And again, it's literally the perfect example of getting you out of jhana, right? Because jhana is actually described as like this nectar. You go into jhana and your hormones, oxytocin, all these beautiful hormones are flowing through you. You feel like you're in a cool, nice water and you feel so nourished, like you just drank the most nourishing drink. And that's what the jhanas feel like. Whereas Coca-Cola is like, you know, giving you sugar and caffeine and salt. It's got all these things to pull you out of jhana. But what is pushed? Coca-Cola is pushed everywhere. Even though everybody knows it's bad for you, it's just, you go to a kid's party, they're drinking Coca-Cola. Oh, everybody's doing it, right? So it almost seems, and that's just the beginning, you know, it just seems like there's no one on TV advertising jhanas to you, right? Because it's like everything that we're selling you, all the end result of what we're selling, everyone's trying to sell you, which is happiness, you already have it inside of you for free. So why is everybody not practicing jhana? Because it's not part of our culture now. It's not because it's not true, not because it's not wonderful, but again, see for yourself. And then likewise, prajna. Think about our education system. Did you know that our education system, going back to the ancient Greeks, used to all be based on prajna? They used to call it the liberal arts. Like the word liberal, like now the political party, the liberals, it used to actually mean the liberating arts. What are the liberating arts? Three things: logic, grammar, and rhetoric. Logic, grammar, and rhetoric. Knowing what words mean, learning how to do a logical analysis, learn how to think for yourself, learn how to, once you learn how to think for yourself, learn how to communicate effectively to others. Do we learn that? Absolutely not, right? What does it come down to? We actually do learn prajna in kindergarten, only in kindergarten. Why? They teach us who, what, why, when, where, and how. That is the most important thing we ever learn in school, right? After that, it's just memorize this, and you cannot go to the next level unless you answer all the questions the way we tell you is the answer. Even though half the science textbooks are outdated and they're not even true, if you want to get to the next level and you want to get a good job in good college, you have to answer this. That is the opposite of prajna. So again, why are we not having prajna? It's because it's just not part of our culture. And you could wonder, what is the conspiracy? You know, why would they not want us to have prajna? Well, if we don't have prajna, we don't have jhana, we don't have peace of mind. So we're constantly, you know, buying things. And if we don't have prajna, we don't question who's in power. We don't question who's telling us what to do. And we know the American diet's terrible. We know there's chemicals in the food, and we all know it's bad. Everyone's like, isn't it a shame? But nothing gets done. Why does nothing get done? So because most people, when they don't have prajna, they're like, well, if it was really that bad, it wouldn't be happening, you know. So that's really the weakness. Because without prajna, unfortunately, there are some people who are sociopathic. That's a sad reality. And prajna is the greatest weapon, right? Prajna is like a sword. It's a sword, right? Jhana is like a potion. It heals us. Jhana is how we heal. But prajna is how we protect ourselves and how we protect others. Because if people have, you know, what's that Bible quote again? Like they suffer from lack of knowledge or something. Like if people have the wrong information, they're going to suffer. So
without vision, the people perish.
Thank you, brother. And on that, I will, I actually just want to say one more thing. I had this planned, but prajna, if you haven't noticed, it is very detached from the emotions, which nowadays is not popular because everyone's very into the emotions. And I'll tell you, it's true. Prajna is learning to take the emotions out of something and use logic. However, the Buddha taught love and compassion is equally as important as prajna. So even though we haven't talked about it, but you have to develop both. And when people don't have prajna, they tend to revert to emotion. When they don't understand something, they tend to come up with an emotional reason. So check yourself. If you're getting emotional, there's a chance. Now, when I say emotional, I mean in a negative way. Love is the most important emotion. And you could think of it like this. Here's a metaphor. Jhana is like the car. Jhana is like the car, right? We're trying to get to, we're driving, right? Prajna is like the destination. And compassion is like the fuel of the car. So compassion and love is the motivation, is the highest intention that will keep us developing prajna. Because you're like, oh, why should I develop jhana and prajna? It's easier. I'll just keep eating the cheeseburgers. I'll just keep watching Netflix, eating the cheeseburgers, and ignorance is bliss, right? That's the opposite of prajna. Ignorance is bliss. Prajna is like, no, prajna is higher bliss. So, but why do we develop prajna? Well, when you start to think about other people, the people you love, but then the people you don't love, and you realize everybody you see is trying to be happy, not knowing that they have jhana already. And they're suffering because they don't have, they have this prajna, but they're not using it properly. So that motivates us to be a living example. So it's a beautiful formula of the prajna, the jhana, and the love, which we'll cover more.